Hey everyone, so today we're in Kamakura visiting the Daibutsu, which is this giant Buddha statue behind me. It's really crowded today, so it's kind of loud. I'm going to move to a quieter place. Is that a little better? While the Heian era was a time of peace and tranquility, the Kamakura and Muromachi periods were times of war and power struggles. Power shifted from the nobility to the warrior class, and artisans had a new class to cater to, one that had distinct aesthetic taste and interest from the nobility. Let's take a look at the history of the Kamakura period and its art history. After centuries-long power struggle between the imperial house and the powerful Fujiwara clan, control over the government shifted away from both of them. The war turned into a fight between the two most powerful warrior clans, the Taira and the Minamoto. First, let's talk about who these warrior clans are. In the Heian period, the court and the metropolitan aristocracy were reluctant to leave the capital, but their primary source of income were from country estates, or shoen, scattered throughout the provinces. Thus, they would appoint regents to oversee their properties, and these positions often became hereditary, falling to certain clans who aligned with the great aristocratic houses who owned the land. They pretty much become like a sub-branch of these houses, and it was their duty to enforce the lord's will and defend his rights against encroachment of any neighboring shoen. Therefore, they maintained a level of martial capacity that had been abandoned in the capital during the long period of peace. Since lands were worked by peasants who were basically a bonded serf attached to a shoen, whenever imperial taxation or the demands of the shoen lords became too great and an uprising would occur, it was one of these provincial clans who were called upon to put down the unrest. By the 12th century, these military policemen were known as the samurai, literally meaning one who serves. The war devastated the Heian period aristocratic society. The capital was left in ruins, and great temples in Nara were burned to the ground. The leader of the victorious Minamoto Clan, Minamoto Yoritomo, established a new form of military government called the Bakufu, and placed himself as the general called shogun. By moving the government to the seaside village of Kamakura, Minamoto Yoritomo was able to force the emperor out of state affairs. The emperor at this point was rendered powerless, remaining a divine figurehead in Kyoto. The nobility, who once had great influence and authority with their money and association with the imperial court, was more and more cut off from their sources of revenue as land was taken away and given to the Bakufu and their allies. The aristocracy's power dwindled as their wealth was used up. These new lords or landowners who pledged allegiance to the shogun came to be known as daimyo, literally meaning great name. It is applied to any lord, whether court aristocrat or samurai, of a large estate. But as most great estates were passed into samurai hands, the title took on a military association. Yoritomo's daimyo resided with him in Kamakura, while appointed stewards called shugo oversaw the estates. The art of the Kamakura period is characterized by a couple trends which will be covered in depth during this video. As the warrior class grew in power and wealth, they became important patrons of the arts. Their taste and aesthetics were reflected in the work that they commissioned. Armor and lacquerware became further developed and adorned, and their taste was luxurious but masculine. Buddhist art was also influenced by the military clans, as massive rebuilding projects began after the war, and it was financed by these military figures. Priests became more committed to making Buddhism more available to illiterate commoners and the conservative, so there's a popularizing trend seen in Buddhist art, making works more accessible to a wider audience. Sculpture became more realistic and underwent a classical revival. This period is often regarded as the Renaissance era of Japanese sculpture. Renewed interest in Chinese culture also brought contemporary Song Dynasty influences into their work. We also see a number of artworks referring to the Heian period, marked with a sense of longing for the Golden Age. Kyoto and Nara remained the centers of artistic production and high culture. Since the shogun was a seat won in war, you better bet that other military clans had their eye on the prize. And by prize, I basically mean the power to rule the entire nation. Throughout the following centuries, throughout Kamakura, civil wars were fought amongst different military clans and factions for the title of shogun. Armorers and lacquer craftsmen made great strides during these periods. As you can imagine, there was ample patronage from the newly wealthy samurai class. In the Heian period, arms and armors were divided between those made for aristocratic patrons, meant for court ceremonies, and those made for the battlefield. This means that ones that were pretty were not necessarily functional. Once power shifted to the samurai, there was a greater effort on combining both approaches so that the strong and deadly weapons were also aesthetically beautiful, both elegant and durable. Suits of armor were more opulent and luxurious, but also of what was then considered a deeply masculine aesthetic. The majority of samurai armor is made out of densely woven lacquered iron and leather, while the decorative areas are made out of silk, gilt copper, and doeskin. The breastplate of this suit is decorated with a colored image of Fudo, the immovable, a ferocious-looking deity whose menacing glare subdues evil and frightens unbelievers. While Emaki, or painted scrolls, continued to be produced during the Kamakura period, this period is much more strongly characterized by sculpture, regarded as the Renaissance era of Japanese sculpture. The Kei school of sculptors, based in Nara, was perfectly positioned to carry out the rebuilding and restoration of sculptures of temples affected by war. The school itself is a legacy of Heian sculptor Jocho, and they created a new, more realistic style of sculpture. Important figures include Koke and his sons Unkei and Kaikei. By the way, these studios are often a family affair, hence the K names. And they're responsible for some of the most innovative and accomplished works of the Kamakura. Succeeding the Yosegi Zukuri, or multiple block technique, they studied early Nara period masterpieces and Chinese Song Dynasty sculptures and paintings, reviving qualities such as representation of sentiment, solidity, and movement. Their choice of medium was wood and bronze, so what wasn't revived were clay, dry lacquer, embossing, and terracotta sculptures. In the first years after the Genpei Civil War, one of the top priorities was renewal. They wanted to revitalize the nation's traditional religious foundations, rebuild Buddhist temples damaged or destroyed during the wars, and update existing religious institutions to satisfy the newly emerging needs and tastes. One of the highest priorities was rebuilding the highly revered ancient temple, Todaiji in Nara. The priest placed in charge of the rebuilding efforts was Shunjobo Chogen. Having visited China 3 times to further his Buddhist training, he had learned contemporary Chinese Buddhist architecture, which influenced the rebuilding aesthetic called Daibutsujo, or Great Buddha style. This portrait sculpture of Chogen shows the starkly realistic style of this period. Probably made shortly after his death in 1206, it would have been used for memorial services in his honor. It shows him as an old man sitting in a slightly hunched forward position, reciting the Nembutsu mantra. He keeps count of his recital with the prayer beads of his rosary. Made of hinoki, or Japanese cypress, in the multiple block technique, it is decorated simply with paint, flesh tones for the skin, and black for the robe. The sculpture paid close attention to the details of the face, with prominent cheekbones, wrinkled flesh, pursed lips, and deep eye cavities under the bony eyebrows. This is an image of an old priest who is physically and emotionally tough and wholeheartedly committed to his religious vocation. Todaiji is also home to one of the most famous works of Unkei and Kaikei during this time, which is a colossal pair of Kongo-rikishi. The two Neo-Guardian images which flank the sides of the Nandaimon, or Great South Gate, are a great example of the dynamic, realistic style of this period. Around 8 meters or 26 feet tall, they are carved from multiple blocks and took about 3 months to create, indicative of the sophisticated studio system of artisans who worked under the direction of a master sculptor. These figures, called the Neo-Guardians, protect the entrance gates at temples. Agyo with his mouth open on the right, and Ungyo with his mouth closed on the left. They are said to represent life and death, and the beginning and the end. Their fierce and threatening appearances ward off evil spirits, keeping the temple grounds free of demons and thieves. The two guardians stand in a dramatic hip-slung pose, giving the impression of arrested motion. Raising their arm in a strong protective gesture, their scarves and skirts are swept to one side. The carving strongly emphasizes the three-dimensional features and sense of movement. Their knowledge of 8th century Nara sculpture was used to rework a new style appropriate for the times. The realism, emphasized to a point of exaggeration, heightens the sense of drama. An example of Unkei's mature style can be found in the Hokuendo, or North Octagonal Hall, of the Kofukuji temple complex. At the center is Miroku Bushi, or Future Buddha, who was originally attended by 2 bodhisattvas, the Shiteno, or the 4 guardian kings, and 2 Indian rakan. Of these, only Miroku and the 2 rakan have survived. Miroku sits cross-legged on a tall octagonal platform with an elaborate open-work halo behind his head. The sculpture represents the mature Buddha of the future, and Unkei has achieved a new balance of proportion, similar to how Jocho created new proportions for Amida no Rai in the Byodoin during the Heian period. This figure doesn't appear to be top-heavy. The facial features and drapery are more deeply carved, giving it a more natural look. The eyeballs are made of an inset crystal, a practice which became common in the late 12th century. The pupils seem to be focused downward, suggesting an expression of melancholy. The style is more approachable, a gentle, almost human-looking deity with whom the worshipper can hope to communicate. In Buddhism, the rakan, also known as arhat, have not yet achieved complete enlightenment, but are far along the path to it, already free from rebirth. The brothers Muchaku and Seshin are depicted. Muchaku is depicted as a more slender figure than his brother and holds a cylindrical object, perhaps a reliquary wrapped in a piece of cloth. Seshin's hands appear to be gesturing as he speaks. Muchaku appears more reflective and introverted, while the other is outgoing, seeming to make eye contact with the viewer. Both wear priests' robes that fall in deeply carved and irregularly patterned folds. They appear completely natural, freestanding and not frontally posed. A particularly striking image is one by Unkei's son, Kosho. This image is of Kuya, a priest who traveled through the island of Honshu to spread the message of Amida Buddhism. He converted to Amidism after he killed a deer and then realized the enormity of his act. He proceeded to teach the Nembutsu mantra at each village and town with a ritual of worship that included chanting the mantra while dancing to gongs and bells. An antler is affixed to his walking staff, serving as a reminder to the reason he became a priest. Kosho's statue shows the man in a walking stance with a gong held to his chest by a yoke over his shoulders. Attached to a wire coming out of the priest's mouth are 6 standing Amida Buddha figures, symbolizing the 6 syllables of the mantra, portraying his dedication and faith. After the Genpei War, priest Myoe Shonin sought to revive the Kegon sect, one of the important sects during the Nara period, but struggled while Pure Land sects became more popular. As a son of a Fujiwara mother and a Taira adopted father, he was orphaned at the beginning of the Genpei Civil War. He was adopted a year later by his uncle, who was a monk at Jingoji. Myoe was a bit of a recluse, uninterested in the rebuilding projects, and instead turned his attention to forming a new Buddhist doctrine based on a combination of elements in the Shingon and Kegon. The Kegon, engi, and Emaki consisted of two narrative scrolls. It depicts the life of two Korean monks, Uisang and Wuhyo, their Japanese names being Gisho and Gangyo respectively. They are the two founders of the Korean Kegon school, from which Japanese Kegon Buddhism is derived. The story begins with the two monks leaving the Korean kingdom Silla, intending to travel to China together. The two spend their first night in a burial cave, taking shelter from the rain. Gangyo decides to look within himself to decide the best course of action. After seeing a gruesome single-horned demon, he decides to abandon his plans for travel. Gisho, however, continues on to China and has a bunch of adventures. Just before he returns to Korea, he meets the beautiful Zaemyo, who falls in love with him. Being devoted to Dharma, he ignores her attentions, and she is forced to accept her beloved's religious dedication. When he returns to his homeland, she throws herself into the ocean and protects his ship as a dragon. Yep, you heard right, she turned into a dragon. Bet you can't say you've done that for love. This scroll is an excellent example of the popularizing trend seen during the Kamakura period. It is created for a wider range of people, perhaps even catering to a more female audience, suggested by the limited use of Chinese characters, which women were discouraged from learning, and the emphasis on Zaemyo as a protector. This story reads like an epic novel filled with a long journey and poignant love story, and the speech written right next to the characters is comparable to a contemporary comic strip. While the Heian aristocracy were successfully pushed aside by the new government, that isn't to say there wasn't anyone missing the good old days. Murasaki Shikibu's Genji Monogatari continued to be read, and a new set of the Genji Monogatari Emaki were produced. There was also a greater interest in Murasaki Shikibu herself. The nobility, nostalgic for the past days of wealth and power, revived and illustrated her diary in order to recapture the splendor of the author's times. The diary consists of anecdotes from her time as a lady-in-waiting in the imperial court of Kyoto. Events include celebrations surrounding the birth of Prince Atsuhira, but despite the gaiety and splendor of such events, Murasaki often reveals her dissatisfaction with court life. Scenes are filled with a sense of the fleeting nature of joy and pleasure. Oftentimes it reflects the author's feelings of loneliness and being subjected to the will of people who outrank her. On one occasion, two drunken couriers attempt to come into her room as she holds her windows shut against them. While pictorial compositions are similar to those of Heian period illustrations of Genji Monogatari, the effects in the 13th century scroll is entirely different. While the Heian period illustrations expressed character emotions through landscape, here the figures instead express themselves directly, and the landscape becomes a pictorial element to be appreciated apart from the events in the narrative. Like the Heian period scrolls, the work is made with the Sukiri-e technique, but without the same care. Silver is used less frequently, and less attention has been given to the interior architectural details, such as designs on the sliding doors. Amida Buddhism, or Pure Land Buddhism, grew in popularity since the Middle Heian period. However, surrounded by the devastation during times of war, people perceived themselves to be living in the time of Mappo. According to the Buddhist tradition, at the end of the age of the present Buddha, Shaka, it is the time of Mappo, a degenerate period of 10,000 years distinguished by conflict, cruelty, and despair. In the Mappo phrase, evil is so pervasive that conventional strategies for attaining nirvana, such as reading and copying sutras and meditation, would be of no avail. Pure Land Buddhism, on the other hand, provided a sure path to salvation for the men and women who found little solace from other Buddhist schools. It is centered on the belief that salvation, or rebirth in Amida's paradise, could be achieved through faith in Amida Buddha and the practice of the Nembutsu mantra. The two types of Pure Land devotional paintings, mandalas and raigo paintings, took on a renewed importance. Their imagery focuses on the depiction of Amida's Western paradise, and the contemplation of these paintings is intended to aid the practitioner in visualizing the promised land. The Taima mandala is one of the earliest of which is preserved in a tapestry version in the Taima-dera. The temple is in the village of Taima in the Nara prefecture. It is estimated to have been made in the later half of the Nara period and an import from China. There are no references to it in the Nara or Heian period documents, but it was rediscovered in the 13th century and became the prototype for a series of mandala paintings of Amida Western Paradise. So popular it was to copy this original that I could only find this one detail photo of the original, but plenty of copies, such as this one executed in rich colors, gold and silver. The central element of the mandala is an image of the Court of Essential Doctrine depicting Amida's paradise. The Buddha is seated on a high octagonal throne, flanked by the Bodhisattvas Kannon and Seishi, who occupy lower lotus blossom thrones. Numerous smaller bodhisattvas and deities wearing skirts, scarves, and crowns surround the triad. Behind this are multi-storied palaces, and in front of them is a large lotus pond, out of which the souls of the blessed will be reborn into the paradise on lotus blooms. Boats are pulled between the blossoms to collect the small children and other human figures who represent the reborn souls. Along the sides and the bottoms of the paintings are images of the Sutra of Meditation of the Buddha and Infinite Life. On the left is the Court of the Prefectory legend, in which a wicked crown prince imprisoned his father to be starved to death. However, the old king's principal wife and prince's mother, Ideiki, brought him food to keep him alive. When the prince found out, he imprisoned his mother as well. She prays to Shaka for deliverance, and the Buddha is so moved by her plight that he appears before her and shows her the paradises of the 10 directions, from which she chooses the Western paradise of Amida. On the right is the mandala of the Court of the 13 Meditational Concentrations, detailing the various wonders of the Western paradise, which Ideiki must visualize to attain rebirth there. On the bottom band are meditations on the 3 levels of rebirth in the Western paradise, and each of these 3 levels are subdivided into 3 degrees. Thus, along the bottom are representations of the 9 different types of raigo. 2 types of raigo painting developed in the late 12th and 13th century. One is the Haya, or swift raigo, in which Amida and his host of bodhisattvas descend to earth in the twinkling of an eye. The other is Yamagoshi, or the mountain crossing raigo, in which only 3 figures, Amida, Kannon, and Seishi, are depicted above a range of mountains, which they must cross to complete their descent on Earth. A classic example of the Haya raigo is the hanging scroll in Chionin. Entering the image at a diagonal from the left, Amida and his host of attendants descend from the heavens on wisps of clouds. The procession is led by Kannon, who is kneeling towards the deceased man. The man, dressed in a monk's robe, sits behind a low table. In the lower left corner of the painting are green mountains dotted with pines and flowering cherry trees, and in the upper right there is a glimpse of a tiny building, suggesting Amida's many-storied palace in the Western paradise. A famous Yamagoshi raigo is the painting in Zenrinji. The golden head and torso of Amida can be seen glowing against a dark sky, his halo suggesting the moon. Below him to the right and left are Kannon and Seishi, who have already crossed the mountain and are bending forward to greet the deceased. The lower center of the painting can be seen as the blue water of a river, and opposite each other on its banks, 2 boys are pointing up at the divinities. To the right and left, at the sides of the painting, the Shintenno, or 4 heavenly kings, are grouped in pairs. Finally, in the left corner is the Sanskrit character for the first syllable of Amida's name. The mountains are dotted with small trees of orange and red leaves of the fall. Now you may have noticed that I haven't said much about Shinto art. In fact, I've only mentioned Shinto architecture thus far. Prior to the second half of the Nara period, kami imagery belonged to an aniconic tradition. Aniconism, meaning without idols or images, usually had a symbolic or suggestive rather than literal representation. For example, something like a mirror can stand in for the presence of a deity rather than giving a deity a human form. During the Nara period, there were efforts to create a harmonious relationship between Japan's ancestral and natural kami and the new teachings of Buddhism and its pantheon of celestial entities. In the mid-8th century, the sun goddess Amaterasu was consulted via her shrine at Ise, and her response was that she and Birushana were simply emanations of one another, creating a process for the two systems to meld during the Heian and Kamakura periods. With a strong tradition of Buddhist sculpture during the Heian period, it became common to give kami a human form in the style of Buddhist entities. These three small wooden sculptures are of a Yasumi Gaoka triad, a monk flanked by two female figures in court costume. Carved out of a single block of wood, it is simple but elegant, an aesthetic that would be maintained among Shinto sculptural imagery over the centuries. Architecture of Shinto shrines also changed during this time. The simple fencing of the Ise and Izumo shrines were replaced by roofed and corridors of cloistered walls, in addition to numerous subsidiary buildings for monks and treasuries. Many summer festivals, such as the Gion, were to propitiate Shinto kami in the hopes that they would save the population from pestilence, earthquake, and warfare. While shrines associated with imperial cults declined from the 14th to 16th centuries, other kami cults, particularly ones that protected communities or had some influence over natural events, received great reverence from the common man, as that given to Pure Land Buddhism. Kitano Tenjin was an entirely new kami created during the Heian period, who continued to grow in popularity among those at court, the samurai, and the populace. The Kitano Tenjin engi Emaki is a scroll that tells the story behind the founding of his Kitano Shrine in Kyoto. Sugawara no Michizane was a leading poet and scholar of the Chinese language, but he was exiled through the plotting of the Fujiwara and died in disgrace. According to the beliefs at the time, the soul of a person who died falsely accused becomes an angry spirit or onro, causing deaths and accidents in their revenge. To appease the spirit in 923, he was posthumously appointed Minister of the Right, but it was believed that his spirit took the form of the god of thunder. In 947, a shrine, Kitano Tenmangu, was built in Kyoto in his honor. Finally, he was accorded the designation of Tenjin, or heavenly deity, and became regarded as the patron god of learning, literature, and calligraphy. Today, students facing an important examination visits a Kitano shrine and prays to Michizane. During the Kamakura period, mandala paintings of Shinto shrines also became popular. The most typical of Shinto mandala images is that of the Kasuga Shrine, which is the family shrine of the Fujiwara. The Kasuga deer mandala features a large white deer manifested on a cloud above the torii gate to the compound of the Kasuga Shrine. From its saddle rises the branch of a sakaki tree, which is framed behind the image of a mirror. Standing on each branch are the 5 Kasuga kami, depicted in their Buddhist forms as Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. The mirror is a reference to Amaterasu, who is coaxed out of her cave with a mirror. The deer is often considered sacred within Japan. From a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha gave his first sermon in a deer park in northern India. However, the deer was considered sacred even before the arrival of Buddhism in Japan. Thanks so much for watching this video. I'm doing a whole series on Japanese art, everything from prehistoric to Heian period, modern Japan to contemporary art and pop culture. Be sure to subscribe to catch them all. Special thanks to our Patreon supporters. I really appreciate your contributions. If you like Little Art Talks and you want to help us keep making more great new videos, you can check out patreon.com/littlearttalks. Also, new end screen. Past Karen didn't do that great of a job at planning how many videos she wanted and how to break up all of these time periods. So there are a few extras that originally were going to go together, but now they are separated. And now I have a new end screen so that you can actually see all the videos. Knowing my luck, it'll probably be further updated in the future, and that will just be a thing. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. It really helps this channel out, and I'll see you guys next time.